Right? Okay, let's look at this particular chapter in John chapter 9. Now when you read John chapter 9, you probably discover that this is a narrative that's full of irony, increase in opposition towards Jesus, and intensified conflicts with the religious authority. The irony is that the man that is born blind at the end of the narrative can see, and the religious leader who can see, right, they are blinded. And what is also interesting in this particular narrative is that if you look at John chapter 8, John chapter 8 verse 12, this is declared, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So Jesus mentioned earlier on, before healing the man born blind, that he is the light of the world. Whoever follows him will not walk in darkness. So interestingly, the man that is born blind, who lived in darkness all his life, can finally see the light as he follows Jesus. And the Pharisees, who have seen the light because they do not recognize Jesus as God, they walk in darkness. And as usual, this particular event happened in Jerusalem, and Jesus healed this man on Sabbath. Now this is the map of Jerusalem as what it would have looked like in the first century. Now if you look at this, don't look at the grayish wall. The grayish wall here was extended after the time of Jesus. During the time of Jesus, this would have been Jerusalem. Right? This would be the temple. This is Gethsemane and Mount Olives over here. Now, this incident happened in Jerusalem, where Jesus saw the man that was born blind, and Jesus healed him. And Jesus asked him to go to the pool of Siloam here. The meaning of the word is sent. So this pool will have been located south of the temple, just at the southern edge of what is known as the city of David. The area that is shaded yellow here is what is known as the city of David. Right, so this pool of Siloam was here, and Jesus sent this man to this pool in order to wash the mud off. So the way Jesus healed this man is quite interesting, right? Jesus put mud mixed with saliva and put it on the man's eye and asked him to go and wash it off. Right? So the pool of Siloam, that's outside the city of David in Jerusalem, was only discovered in the year 2004, just 15 years ago. So it's a fairly recent discovery, and the discovery was actually accidental. What happened was, when the city of Jerusalem was rebuilding its sewage system, and so they were all digging, and suddenly they found a pool that's buried underneath it. Now why is it buried? Because since the first century, Jerusalem has gone through a number of siege, and Jerusalem has gone through earthquakes, so a lot of things has fallen on top of each other. So while they were building or extending the city's sewage system, they actually discovered this pool, what they believe to be the pool of Siloam. So you can see today, this is the pool of Siloam. Now, this pool of Siloam is also interesting because it is a water that flows from Gihon Spring, and then it will end up here at the pool of Siloam. Now, if I can go back here, this slide, you can see there is a Gihon Spring here, there's a pool of Siloam. Now, what happened during the time of Hezekiah? They built a tunnel, and some of you who have been to Israel will have visited Hezekiah tunnel in the city of David. And what happened was, they built this tunnel that draw the water from Gihon Spring from outside the wall into the city, and they dig a tunnel from the pool of Siloam. Now, whole reason is, back in the days of King Hezekiah, the Assyrian king they knew that the Assyrian king was attacking them. So to prevent from the Assyrians to attack them, what they do is, they wanted to divert the water from the Gihon Spring into the city, into a pool of Siloam within the city. The reason is simple. so that your enemies, when they attack you, they don't have access to the water source, right? So if the enemy has access to your water source, and this is the only water source that flows into your city, I can just poison this water source and you're all dead. Or I can do something to the water, you all will be dead already. So what they do is, they quickly build a tunnel from Gihon Spring and to divert the water into the pool of Siloam, so that if the enemy were to attack them, the city of David here, they will not have access to this Gihon Spring, because the water has been flowed underneath the tunnel into the city of David, to the to the pool of Siloam. Now what they did was, in the time of Hezekiah, they start building a tunnel from here and the tunnel from here. So what they do is that one will build here, one will build here, and in the middle they meet. Now, how did this happen? Nobody knows. It is considered an engineering marvel, you know. How do you start constructing from two ends and then you meet in the middle? And you're digging it underground and using axe, and that's how you do it. Some have suggested maybe what they do is they follow the sound. You know, someone was on top tapping, 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 tapping. You just listen to the sound, you start digging, 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 digging. Because archaeologists have discovered that this Hezekiah tunnel underneath it, there are many parts of the tunnel that it veer off and then it's a dead end. Probably suggesting that they will start digging, digging, digging. Halfway through, they realize that, the noise is not there. We have gone off course, come back, come back. Then they start digging from here again. So possibly that could be the reason. So if you go to Israel today, you can actually access to Hezekiah tunnel. In fact, when you go down to Hezekiah tunnel, there are two levels to the tunnel. One is sometimes you call the Canaanite tunnel that you go through, which is all dry. So you can walk through this tunnel and it's all dry. If you really want to go to the Hezekiah tunnel, you have to go one more layer down, and this is often very wet. Right, so normally we don't visit that. So today, if you can see, this is a tunnel that you have gone down to the Siloam tunnel, to the Hezekiah tunnel, and you can walk around this tunnel. These are all dry tunnel. These are all dry, so they are not the wet tunnel. So you go further, one level down is where it is the Hezekiah tunnel that's mentioned, that they dig from both ends. Now interestingly, one from Gihon Spring, one for Siloam pool, when they start digging, 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 they meet halfway. When they meet halfway, they were overjoyed that they hear each other's noise digging through. And then finally, when they meet halfway, they did what they call the Siloam inscription. And this inscription essentially says that the tunnel was completed. And they put this stone, this inscription, in the tunnel itself. Of course, if you go and see the tunnel today, it is a replica. The original one has been taken away and now placed in Istanbul Museum. So the Istanbul Museum will have the original one. The one that you see in the Hezekiah tunnel in Siloam inscription is a replica. So this essentially says this: the tunneling was finished, and this was a matter of the tunneling. While the axe, each man towards his fellow, and there was still 3 cubits they heard the man's voice calling up to his fellow. There was a crack in the rock, and then suddenly they met each other and they were overjoyed. Essentially, that's what they say. So this is the one that talks about how they meet in that tunnel. And this tunnel on the other end, as I can go back the slide again to this map, this is a pool at this end, the pool of Siloam, that Jesus asked this blind man to go and wash himself out. So if you want to have to see how the first century event looked like, this would have been the temple. This is the city of David. Now this is the pool of Siloam right down here. So this is where Jesus would have sent the man that was born blind to go and wash himself. Okay, that's just some historical and archaeological background to this particular site. So let's come back and look at John chapter 9. Now in John chapter 9, it begins when Jesus was walking along. He saw a man blind from birth. And the disciple asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, to the disciples, when they ask a question such as this, it reflects their theological understanding. Now, earlier on, when we look at the sign that Jesus did when he healed the invalid, the third sign, and this man has been invalid for 38 years. And then when he was healed, he didn't know it was Jesus who has healed him. But later on, when Jesus found him in the temple, Jesus told him, stop sinning, or something worse may have happened to you. Now, what does this suggest? Does it suggest that this man has sinned before, that Jesus said, stop sinning? I do not know. But what we do know is that for many Jewish people who lived in the first century, that is their predominant worldview. As far as their worldview is concerned, they look at someone that's not well, whether you are invalid, whether you are paralyzed, or whether you are born blind. Surely you must have done something against God. You must have sinned. And because you sinned, therefore God punished you, and you were in this very particular situation. So, for the man that is born blind, when the disciples look at him, the disciples come to the conclusion that surely this man must have sinned, but since he's born blind, perhaps his parents sinned. That's why they asked Jesus this question, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? So that is a typical Jewish worldview. If you are not well, you're paralyzed, you are born blind, you are a sinner. Now let me take us one step further to reflect on one more incident that is recorded in the Gospel of Mark. In Gospel of Mark chapter 2 verse 1 to verse 11, it records for us an incident where Jesus healed the paralytic man. Now, when Jesus healed the paralytic man, if you read Mark carefully, this man was carried by his 4 friends, right? And they came to the house where Jesus was teaching, and the house was full. They cannot enter the house, right? So what did the 4 friends did? The 4 friends went up to the roof, they dig a hole in the roof, and they lowered his friend to Jesus, right? What was the first thing that Jesus said to this man when he was being lowered down? My son, your sins are forgiven. Jesus pronounced the forgiveness of sins first before he healed this man. Before Jesus said, take up your mat and walk. Now, why did Jesus pronounce forgiveness of sins first? Have you ever wondered about that? No? After all, every one of us is a sinner, but why is it so particular for Jesus to announce the forgiveness of sin first? I suspect Jesus was dealing also with the worldview of the people, that if you are in that kind of situation, you are a paralytic, that means you are a sinner, you have sinned, and therefore Jesus wants to address that perception that's in the mind of people. You sin, therefore you are in this situation. So Jesus announced the forgiveness of sin first before he proceeds to heal this man that was paralyzed. Now, interestingly, when this man was being healed, what did he do? He take up his mat, right? What did he do? He walked out the house, right? Now, I want to ask you a question. He couldn't come in because the house was full, right? But then he can walk out the house. Now, if he can walk out a house, surely he can come in, right? Why is it that he couldn't come in? Why is it those by the doors refuse to let him in? Now think about the scenario. If this hall is full and people still want to come in, do you think they can come in? I still think they can come in, because why? Even if it's full, a few of us can make way for him to come in, right? We can part the way for him to come in. In fact, and this man, when he was healed, he can take up his mat, he can walk out. If he can walk out, surely he can come in, right? But why is it that no one wants to make room for him to come in, and the 4 friends have to take him up to the roof? Could it be that the people in that house, when they see the man that is paralyzed, in their mind, a sinner is here. Let's not let this sinner come in. They're the sinner. Block them. Don't let them come in. Surely, if you want them to come in, you can make way at the door for them to come in. But nobody is willing to make way. Probably that suggests to us this is the worldview. That when you see someone paralyzed, you see someone born blind, this is a sinner. Let's prevent this sinner from coming. We don't have anything to do with this sinner. We want to detach ourselves from this group of people. That's why for the disciples, when they see a man born blind, immediately in their mind, they were thinking, Who sinned, this man or his parents? To the disciple, this blind man is the object of a theological debate. Parents sin or he sin. Now, we are all sinners. Who cares parents sin, you sin? You're all sinners, right? But they get themselves into a theological debate. But far more important, underlying that the perception is this. If I see you born blind, I would believe that either you sin or your parents sin. That's why you're in this situation. But look at me. I'm perfectly healthy. I'm not paralyzed in any ways. I can walk. I can run. I'm not lame. I'm not deaf. I'm not mute. I'm not blind. I can see. So what would the disciples be thinking of themselves? We are righteous before God because God has not punished us. So that was a thinking. And I think Jesus needs to address the disciples in this manner. Just do not think that someone is like that, therefore the parents sin or he sin. And just don't think that because you are whole, you are not physically infirm in any way, that doesn't mean you're not a sinner. Jesus tried to dispel this notion. That's why Jesus said in verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sins, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, how can the works of God be displayed in a blind man? We have to wait for a while until the end of the narrative. Then, of course, Jesus said this. He began to heal this man. Before that, he repeat in verse 4, as long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. See, Jesus repeat that I am again. He mentioned in chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. Here, he mentioned again, I am the light of the world. And this blind man who has never seen in his life is going to see the light of the world for the first time. So what did Jesus do? Jesus spit on the ground, make some mud with saliva, put it on this blind man's eye and tell him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. I wonder if you are the blind man, how would you have felt? You can't see, right? You certainly don't know what Jesus was doing, right? And suddenly, Jesus put it on the ground and mix it and put it on your eyes. And I said, hey, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. Now, I'm a blind man, right? Suddenly, someone put some sticky stuff on my eyes. I can't even see. I don't even know. How would you have felt? You probably might be cursing the man who did this. What prank are you playing on me? Can't you see I'm blind? You still want to do this thing on me. And now you ask me to go to the pool of Siloam. Hey, where is that? Where is that pool? I had to make my ways there. And lo and behold, the path that leads to the pool of Siloam in the first century may not be a straight path like what you have. It's like the pedestrian path in the streets of KL is never even one. You know this or not? There's always a tree trunk that come out. There's a tile that's broken somewhere. Can you imagine you're blind? How are you going to walk that? Even those of us who see, we trip also. So can you imagine you walk on an uneven path? You have this sticky stuff in your eyes. Can you imagine? I wonder whether he will wipe and what it is, I don't know, just imagine only. So he made his way all the way to the pool of Siloam and he began to wash it off. Now, as he was washing it off, suddenly he realized, hey, I'm no longer living in darkness anymore. Suddenly, my eyes can see. And then when the eyes can see, he suddenly realized, hey, now I can imagine what blue sky looks like. The flowers, I can see now. The people that's walking the street, I can see now. And suddenly I can see the grandeur of the temple in Jerusalem. Now you can imagine the joy of this blind man, right? He suddenly can see. Never mind the sticky stuff, it's worth all the way finding myself all the way to the pool of Siloam and wash it off. I can now see. As you walk around, suddenly you hear a familiar voice. Maybe this blind man will run out this blind. Hey, I recognize this voice. So you are so and so. You can imagine. Must be overjoyed. I can only imagine if I'm the blind man, I'll be overjoyed. I'm not sure about you if you're the blind man. I hope you'll be overjoyed too. But suddenly, you discover that because you have been healed and you can see, and it's on a Sabbath, you realize you land yourself into a religious controversy. Not everyone is pleased with you, with the fact that you can now see. The first thing that you see is verse 8. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Hey, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some say he was. Some say, no, he only looks like him. He sounds like him. He looks like him, but it's not him. Now you know where the inspiration comes from, that statement. It sounds like me, but it's not me comes from. Then he himself said, "I am the man." And then they asked, "Hey, how then were your eyes open?" He replied, "The man they call Jesus put some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go and wash into Siloam. And I wash, I come back, I can see." Who is this man? I don't know. Where is this man? I don't know. Now, interestingly, when the neighbors see this man that he can now see, is this fellow who sits begging? Perhaps one of the neighbors might even say, he can see now. You mean all these years he's cheating on us? He begged and we give him money. We still give him money only. But is he cheating or not? Then some say, he is lah. Then this man, no, I'm the one. I was blind, but now I can see. So they ask, how can you see? Some guy lah by the name of Jesus heal me. Now to the neighbors, when they see this man, they only think of him as an economic liability. Right? He's a beggar. He sits there, he begs from us. Probably for the neighbors, this man is probably worth nothing. Out of compassionate ground, we give it to him lah. That's about it. But he is essentially a liability for our society. Interestingly, the neighbors brought him to the Pharisees. When you go to the Pharisee, finish. Pharisee will say, we must investigate because this happened on the Sabbath. So what happened? He brought him to the Pharisee. The Pharisee began to investigate. So for the Pharisees, this blind man has become the object of their agenda because they want to know who did this on Sabbath. And when they discovered it was Jesus, they used this blind man to get to Jesus. So they always have an agenda. And then in a part of the investigation, the Pharisee called their parents. And the parents came. And what did the parents say? The parents knew that they were fearful of the religious leaders. They don't want to say anything. The parents, when they were being called, they simply say, no, he is of age, please ask him. Don't involve us. They only say that we know he's our son, we know he was born blind, how he can see, who opened his eyes, we don't know, ask him, he is of age. And John tells us in verse 22, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And the Jewish say that anyone who acknowledged Jesus was the Messiah would be excommunicated from the synagogue. So the parents were very fearful. The parents would not want to have anything to do with the son. Now, which parents would this be? When the son was born blind, now the son can heal, and you are being called, you say, nothing to do with us. You go and ask him, he's of age. They were fearful. Fearful of what? Fearful of being excommunicated from the synagogue. If you live in the first century, that was something that's very fearful. Excommunication is something very fearful. Once you are excommunicated from a synagogue, you can be sure you cannot go to the synagogue down the street and join them. It will not happen. You will be excommunicated already. It's unlike us today. You excommunicate me, as I told you, I just go down across the road, there's UMC, I go further down, there's SIB, there are Kingdom City, plenty of churches for me to go. So what's the big deal? You want to excommunicate me? So what's the big deal? You want to discipline me? I just walk out next door, would welcome me with open arms because I add to their numbers. So we take these kind of things a bit more lightly, but in those days, this was a serious matter. So if you see all these people surrounding this blind man, you see that every one of them treat him as some sort of object, right? The disciples, object of theological debate. The neighbors, object of liability. The parents, the son has now become their object of fear. To the Pharisees, they were the object for their agenda. No one ever cared for him. Now, if you notice in this narrative, right, from the moment he was healed until he was being investigated by the Pharisee, and ultimately, this blind man was excommunicated, right? Remember, the Pharisee excommunicated him. Now, do you see that all these things that happened, no one defended him? It was only after he was excommunicated that Jesus appeared to this man and revealed himself to him. And towards the end of the chapter, we read that Jesus revealed himself to him and he believed in Jesus. And Jesus has already said right in the beginning of John chapter 9, he must work so that God's glory might be displayed in the people. That's why Jesus said, this man, he is born blind, not because he sinned or his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So for Jesus, he's not merely an object for theological debate. He's not an object of fear. He's not an object of liability. Neither he's an object for his own personal agenda. For Jesus, this is a man created in the image of God that must be redeemed. So Jesus is the only one that views this person very, very differently. Right? Now, let's look at some detail about how the Pharisees. Now, in the way the Pharisee investigated this case is quite interesting. They asked the blind man first in verse 15, how did you receive your sight? No? What have you to say about him? Now, you look at the way they question. And then when come to the parents, the Pharisee asked the parents, is this your son? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? Now, interestingly, if you look at the manner of interrogation, the Pharisee never celebrates the fact that this man can now see. There's no sense of compassion that a man that's born blind has now been healed. What you want to look for is, what happened? What happened? Who did this? Who did this? You want to get to the person because it was done on the Sabbath. And look at the way the Pharisee interrogated the man that is born blind. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? We don't even know where this man come from. And then they even accuse this man born blind. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And he was excommunicated. Now, if you are the man born blind, I often wonder how would you have felt. As I said earlier on, the joy of the fact that you can see was only short-lived. You get yourself entangled into controversy after controversy with the neighbors, with the Pharisee, with your own parents. Can you imagine how would you have felt? Your parents don't even want to be even disown you. And subsequently, you are being excommunicated. You might be wondering and ask yourself, if you're this blind man, hey, what have I done? A stranger come up to me. I didn't even ask him to heal me, right? This stranger volunteered to heal me, the man they call Jesus. And suddenly, I got myself caught up in controversy after controversy after controversy. And I was excommunicated. What have I done to deserve this? You might even ask yourself. But throughout this narrative, let's not forget the blind man's response while he was being interrogated. Many people ask him, who did this? How can you see? Now, if you look at this, you can see the progression of his faith. In verse 11, when he was asked by the neighbors, who did this? He can only reply, the man they call Jesus, right? The man they called Jesus. I don't know him, but they told me it was Jesus. And then when come to verse 17, when the Pharisee interrogated him further, he said, oh, he is a prophet. It is not the man they say is a prophet already, right? He is a prophet. That means he now confesses Jesus as a prophet himself. And then in verse 27, when he was being pressed further, he asked his disciple, do you want to be his disciples too? Sarcasm, at its best. And then when we come to verse 33, when he was being pressed further, he said, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Now, do you see there's a progression of his own faith as well? started from the man they called Jesus to his confession, he must be a prophet and he must be someone from God. And when he met Jesus face to face, when the Lord revealed himself to this man, he was ready to believe. And he said, Lord, I believed. And he worshipped Jesus. You can see the progression of faith of this man that was born blind. I was blind, but now I see. From the man they called Jesus to Lord, I believe. And he worshipped Jesus. Now, look at the Pharisee. The Pharisee who can see are now blind. How can it be so? Look at the progression. Verse 16. This man is not from God. How can a sinner do such miraculous sign? They questioned Jesus. Then verse 18. They did not believe the man was blind from birth. They threatened to all who believe in Jesus as the Messiah to be excommunicated. And they continue on to say, we know that Jesus was a sinner. Right? You see how their progression into blindness? And then in verse 28, 29, they say, as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. And then when Jesus pronounces it as blind, they say, hey, are we blind too? Are you talking about us? Can you see the Pharisee? From people that can see, because they choose not to believe in Jesus, you can see the progression that they were blinded. Was blind, but now I see. That was a confession of a man born blind. For the disciple, I can see, but now I am blind. Now what was interesting is, towards the end of the narrative, after the man has been thrown out in verse 34, verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Here you see the compassion of Jesus. After Jesus healed this man, he was being excommunicated. When Jesus heard that he has been excommunicated by the Pharisee, the first thing that he did was to look for this man, to look for the man that was born blind. Jesus didn't leave him alone. He sought him out. And when he found this man, he asked them, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man that was born blind, who is now healed, said, who is he, sir? Not who is here. Who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. And Jesus told him, you have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Remember earlier on, the disciple asked a question, who sinned, this man or his parents? Jesus said, neither. But this man was born blind so that God's work may be revealed. How can God's work or God's glory be revealed in this man that was born blind? I think the answer was found here. Now, when Jesus found this man who can now see, Jesus asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? He said, who is he, sir? Tell me that I may believe. You know what? How did Jesus answer him? You have seen him. You are no longer blind anymore. Your eyes can see. You can now see him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you now. Jesus revealed himself to him that he can finally see Jesus. When he saw Jesus, his appropriate response was to say, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped Jesus. And if we take the context of the Jewish people, the culture of the Jewish people, when this blind man sees Jesus, when Jesus told him, you have now seen the Son of Man, his eyes was no longer blind already. He immediately said, Lord, I believe. And a Jewish man would immediately kneel down when they worship God. And most likely, he would have fallen prostrate before Jesus and worshiped Jesus because he has seen God. How can a man born blind be a testimony of the good works of God? Because he had seen God. The blindness was removed. And that's why for the Pharisee, Jesus said, for judgment I have come into the world, so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. And the Pharisee, are we blind too? And Jesus said, if you were blind, you will not be guilty of your sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. So what is Jesus saying about this man that was born blind? How can God's word be revealed in him? Because he can see. For those of us who walk in darkness, spiritual darkness, when God shines his light through, we see the light of Christ. The works of God is being displayed. The glory of God is being revealed. Remember I mentioned last night, when we talk about the glory of God, it's not something big, thunderous. The glory of God revealed in our daily life. When we as a sinner come to realize that we are sinners, and we come to believe in God, where our spiritual blindness is being removed, there the glory of God is being revealed. There the works of God is being displayed. Just like how it was displayed in this man, even though he's born blind. God has chosen to reveal himself to him, and he can see. And interestingly, after this, as you move on to John chapter 10, we see that Jesus declared himself that he is a good shepherd. And this good shepherd discourse, Jesus warned the people about the Pharisees. He is a good shepherd that leads the people to God. But the Pharisee is the one that leads people astray. And what was even more interesting is that as you continue to look at chapter 10, it has a sad ending. And if you move on towards the second half of chapter 10, the Jews wanted to kill Jesus. They want to stone Jesus. They want to seize Jesus. And all this happened during the Feast of Dedication, which is a festival of light. Can you imagine? During the festival of light, the Pharisee could not recognize that the light of the world is in their midst. And they want to seize him, they want to stone him. Truly, when we come to the end of John chapter 10, the festival of light ended in darkness. Because the religious leaders choose to turn their backs on the light of the world, and they walk into darkness. That's such an irony, isn't it? The festival of light ended up to be a day when darkness is remembered because they have rejected Jesus. Now, as you reflect on this narrative, I just now ask you to read, to consider the blind man, the Pharisee, the disciples, the neighbors, and Jesus' attitude. Sometimes I wonder which of this character is the one that we identify with the most in our journey of faith at this point in time. Are we like the disciples? Sometimes we are very cynical. We often strike up theological debates to satisfy our own intellectual curiosity. Not that it's anything wrong. No, it's not. Are we just like that all the time? Argumentative? Or are we like the Pharisees, always looking for a reason to justify what you're going to do and often use people for our own agenda? Could we, like the parents, because of fear, we don't want to stand up for the truth? We rather let him settle himself. He's big enough, we don't care. Or we are our neighbors, when we look at people, we often think of economic terms. Ayo, this fellow, we have to give money to him because he's a blind man. Or are we like the blind man, groping in the dark, waiting for the light to shine upon us, and when we see the light, it sometimes ended us into religious controversies before we can truly fall prostrate before Jesus to worship him. I wonder whether which character that you see in this story that you resonate with the most. Is it the disciple? Is it the Pharisees? Is it the parents? Is it the neighbors? Is it the blind man himself? Who do you identify with the most? You know, it may not be anyone, but it may be one of this character that you identify. It may not even be any character, but if you do identify with any of this character, why is it that you resonate with this character? Perhaps this is a question that we can ask ourselves. What does it tell us about our own spiritual journey of faith at this point in time? All of us have a different journey of faith, right? Some of us have it very difficult. Some of us has gone through tremendous hardships. Some of us may have it a bit easier. But whatever it is, which character do we identify here the most? And what is the Lord speaking to you and I, and as we reflect on our own journey of faith here? Okay, with this, I'm going to pause for about, it's 3 o'clock, I'm going to pause about 10 minutes, then I'll come back, and then we'll quickly reflect on the last sign, raising of Lazarus, and then we'll have a coffee break later. So just stretch yourself for 5-10 minutes, then I'll talk for another 20 minutes more, and then we have our coffee break later on. Huh? Just stretch yourself, go to the toilet, wash your face. Remember, I'm not the Apostle Paul if you fall. Now this last sign, the 7th sign, is raising Lazarus from the death. Now let's turn to John chapter 11. I'm just going to read a few verses here. Verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Thus Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to the disciples, let us go back to Judea. Now Bethany today, we can still visit it if you go to Israel. And even though Bethany and Jerusalem is only a short distance away, probably 3 kilometers away, and if you walk, it will probably take you 40 minutes on foot. But today, if you were to travel from Jerusalem to Bethany, by car, it will take you 40-45 minutes. In fact, walking is faster sometimes. The reason being is Israel has built the dividing walls between Bethany and Jerusalem. Bethany falls under Palestinian control, not under Israeli control. So there's a checkpoint that you have to go through when you go in and out. So sometimes it's a little bit inconvenient to go through this and that. So to go to a place that's so near, you have to go one big round in order to get there. Now Bethany today, there is this church called the Church of St. Lazarus, where we commemorate the raising of Lazarus. So this church, or the facade of the church, you can see the 3 mosaic icon up there that has Mary, Lazarus, and Martha. And within the church, you can see there's a fresco on the wall, painting on the wall, depicting the raising of Lazarus. Now what is interesting in this account is that John tells us Jesus loved this family, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. In fact, Bethany is a home away from home of Jesus. Whenever Jesus is in Jerusalem, he probably spent the night in Bethany. In the final week of the life of Jesus, when Jesus entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he went back to Bethany and stayed the night, and then he's back to Jerusalem again. So Bethany is like a home away from home that Jesus would probably spend time with, staying with this family. So Jesus loved them. But interesting, despite of the love that Jesus had for this family, he actually deliberately delayed going to see them. You notice or not in verse 6, when Mary sent news to Jesus, Jesus, one you love is so sick, please come. And then what did Jesus do? He heard that Lazarus was sick. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. Jesus delayed for 2 days. And then finally, when he moved to Bethany, he realized that Lazarus is already dead and was already in the tomb. And verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And Martha says in verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So they really sent news to Jesus. If Jesus will not delay and make immediate action and probably travel to them, they would still be alive. But why was it Jesus deliberately delayed and result in the death of Lazarus? Even when Jesus was traveling there, probably Jesus take it very slowly, purposely delayed. Why was this delay on the part of Jesus in going to the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? More so if Jesus loved them. Can you imagine if your loved one is not well, you drop everything and go back home? Your loved one, in fact, last time I was telling you, if my sister checked on my mom and is not too well, I probably have to end my session and go home immediately. You know, and of course, because of that, someone asked me, "Hey, Yong, you mentioned about your mom, you mentioned about your sister, you didn't mention about your wife, So the answer is obvious, right? So quite glad that you all are paying attention. So the delay of 4 days. Now, interestingly, one rabbi actually says this. The rabbi actually believes that for 3 days, the soul hovers around above the grave, contemplating a return to the body. You know, after 3 days, when the soul sees that the facial color has faded, you go away and never to return. That was a quite interesting Jewish belief that after 4 days, death is final in that sense. There's no more hope of a person ever live again. It's quite interesting. It's just a Jewish idea. When you die, there's a possibility that you might be resuscitated, but after 3 days, that's it. And so maybe that's why Jesus delayed a little bit. And then when he delayed, and when Jesus wanted to resurrect Lazarus, you know what Jesus was telling them to do? Roll away the stone, and then he called for Lazarus. Right? Now the people told Jesus, Martha told Jesus in verse 39, but Lord, but this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. So they all knew that the body is really beginning to decompose already. So what is there? There's no more hope of resuscitating the person. So why do you still want to do it? Now in the Jewish custom, the burial oftentimes goes like this. When someone passes away, you will then put a lot of spices on the person's body and you wrap it in linen and you put it into a grave, like a little chamber, you put it in. Then you roll a stone over this tomb. And you normally leave the body there for about a year or two after the body is fully decomposed already. Then you take out the body, you collect the bones, then you put the bone into ossuary, into a stone, then you cover it up. So that is a permanent resting place, and then you consider that is a proper burial for the person. And so when the person first passes away, you put it into the burial chamber. Then when the body decomposes, you collect the bones, you put it into a permanent burial. That's what they often do. So Martha said, look, there is a bad order already. Why do you still want to raise him up? And here is where Jesus reminded Martha that he is the resurrection and the life. Now what is also interesting is that when Jesus asks the family, where have you placed him? They tell Jesus, come and see. And in verse 35, you see the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Now, when you see Jesus weeping in verse 35, is a different Greek word that is being used. Number of times, the whole idea of weeping appears throughout chapter 11. For example, you see in chapter 11, verse 33, Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews also weeping. And the word weeping here suggests to weep or to wail, and the emphasis is on the noise that's being made. In fact, Jewish people has a custom in the first century that when someone passed away, you've got to hire professional mourners to come, and they will mourn with you. Not too different from the Chinese. When someone passes away, you have the band, you have people who come and cry and mourn with you. So the Jewish people do that as well. You have flute players, you have professional mourners. So this weeping, this word klaio that's being used, suggests a loud wailing. The emphasis is on noise, the wailing part. And then in verse 33, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now that is a different word. This deeply moved in spirit, trouble often has a meaning that you have a strong sense of concern for other people. So in verse 33, Jesus was deeply moved when Jesus saw Mary weeping. So Jesus had deep concern for them. So when we come to verse 35, Jesus wept. And the weeping here, the wept here, is a different Greek word that's being used, it's dakruo. And this word only appears once in the New Testament. Jesus wept here. And this idea of weeping that in verse 35 was different from the weeping that Mary had. Interestingly, in our English translation, we just translate weeping, weeping. But in fact, in the Greek text, there is two different Greek words, has two different concepts. The weeping of Mary was emphasis on, oh Lord, the noise that's being made. But Jesus wept here is not the noise. It's a weeping that is very quiet, probably with shedding of tears. It's a weeping that is so sorrowful within you that no noise come out. Sometimes we are so painful about something, we shed tears, but we just couldn't utter a single word. The intensity is so great that we can't even say anything. Tears can just flow through our eyes, but no words come out. And this is the weeping of Jesus. It's a weeping that is not focusing on the wailing, but it's a weeping that is out of deep concern, out of deep pain, out of deep anguish that Jesus wept. Why was Jesus weeping in this manner when he saw Lazarus? There are probably two layers of meaning here. On one hand, you see the loved one. Jesus loved the Lazarus and the family. Someone that Jesus truly loved had passed away. But the deeper level, probably Jesus was weeping, is knowing that death is a result of sin. Because humanity sins, it results in death. And Jesus himself knows that he is the resurrection of life. And he also knows that his time has come to an end already on earth, where he's going to give his life for the ransom of many. Because after this incident, when you come to chapter 12, Mary and the family throw a dinner in honor of Jesus and Lazarus because they came to life. And John tells us it's only a week before Passover. Very short after a week, Jesus is going to be crucified already. After one more week is already the Holy Week already. So this is the moment that Jesus probably knew that he only have a couple more weeks on earth. And that's why the kind of emotion is very intense, knowing that he's here to fulfill what the Father has sent him to do. And this was a pain that Jesus felt. And as Jesus asked a stone of the tomb to be removed, he called out, "Lazarus, come out." And they took off the grave clothes and they let him go. And Lazarus was raised to life. And if we move on to chapter 12, the family hold a dinner to commemorate this, to remember that Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead. But interestingly, the result is division. Right? If you look at verse 45, after the raising of Lazarus, therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. There are people who believe in him. Verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisee and told them what Jesus had done. And the chief priest and the Pharisee called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here is a man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation. The chief priests and the Pharisee called for an emergency meeting. The Sanhedrin, that were included the Sadducees as well. They were saying, hey, what is happening here? Many people are turning to Jesus already, and they all worship him. He is another king. And then you know what they say here? If we let him go on like this, right, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our temple and nation. For them, they fear the Roman authorities more. Because as far as the Roman authority is concerned, there's only one Caesar. Anyone who proclaims there's another king, right, is seditious indeed. So the Pharisees, the chief priests are all now worried. Now bear in mind, the chief priests in those days, many of them may not even be from the tribe of Levi, because by the time in the 1st century, the temple is actually in some ways controlled by the Roman authority. That's why in the temple to the northern age, they built a temple at Antonio in order for them to station the Roman soldiers there to watch over the temple activities. And they were the one who appoint the chief priest. So the chief priests in the 1st century, essentially, they are political appointments by the Roman. So that's why, in some ways, they say their loyalty is to God, but they also fear the Romans. And this is clearly exhibited here when they say that, no, if we let Jesus go on this way, if everybody is going to worship him as another king, we are dead, man. The Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation. And Caiaphas is worse. Caiaphas said that maybe it's better for you that one man die, that is Jesus die, than for the people, than for the whole nation to perish. Why do they want to do this? Why do they want to kill Jesus? To protect their own positions of power. It's no wonder Jesus cleansed the temple when he was on earth. Oops, I think my battery has gone flat again. Is it? No. Excuse. It's on back, right? Okay, now, so here we see that when Jesus was on earth, he cleansed the temple. And the reason that he cleansed the temple is because the temple was so corrupted. And here we get a glimpse of how the temple is so corrupted. The chief priests fear the Romans' authority far more than they fear God. And if you move on to verse 57, the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it so that they might arrest him. And this happened on Passover. And the Passover is indeed, in some ways, a sad Passover. But yet, it is also a victorious Passover in the sense that it fulfills God's plan of salvation for humanity, where Jesus gave his life for us all, and not only that, he came to life 3 days later. So this final sign, the raising Lazarus from the dead, not points to Jesus as a resurrection of life, that he has the final authority of power over death itself. Death can't even hold Jesus in the grave. So this sign points to Jesus as as the one who has power over death, points to his own resurrection, and not only that, it points to God's fulfilling what was prophesied in the Old Testament, that Jesus will be the Messiah that come and redeem us. So when you look at this 7th sign, it points to this ultimate sign, and this ultimate sign points to the death and resurrection of Jesus. That is a final Passover. Now, if you think about the journey where we come from, we have looked at the 7th sign. Right? So I'm going to pause here so that we could have our coffee break. We're going to break for about 15. We'll come back at about 3:45, and then what I will do for about 15 minutes, I'm going to wrap up everything, right? To look at where we have come from and look at the 7 signs and wrap up everything. And after that, I'll open the time for any question that you might have. We have a short time of question and answer before we wrap up our session today. Right? So let's have our coffee break out there. I know there's a thunder a bit, you know. So it's time to get out, have coffee.